sonicstate.com.
As you can see, my new hosts are treating me very well. I would just like to make the following statement. I was wrong. The Roland TB303 is a god, and it started the revolution that it is techno. And it's in no way a one-trick pony that got lucky. All right. The Proteus is the son of Satan and should never have been included. And the number one has been changed to the Casio CZ101. That is the new official chart of the top 20 greatest synths of all time. Ever.
I tried to make it work. You in a cocktail skirt and me in a suit. Well, it just wasn't me. Everyone has an affair in their life at some point that is dangerous, passionate and destructive. For me, it was the Korg M1. I still remember the first time I saw her on the beach in Saint-Tropez. I couldn't take my eyes off her pitch bender. We embarked on an affair. It was dangerous. It was destructive. And I ended up in a Moroccan dungeon, naked, with nothing to my name but a bowl of couscous and a fake Dolce & Gabbana belt. Stay away from girls like the Korg M1.
You know, you felt a bit when you sat down at your M1 at, start writing at 9:30 in the morning with your Atari ST, that there were probably maybe another 100,000 people doing exactly the same thing at that moment. It felt very, it felt rather institutionalized.
The M1 was huge. I believe it is the best-selling synthesizer of all time. Back to the Cure, we did a psychedelic version of Hello, I Love You, and that's all M1, all those kind of spacey, wizardy sounds. Some of those samples even today, especially the fretless bass, if anyone will ever let you use a fretless bass on anything, is incredible. And it's black, and it looks cool as well. And that's, that's why it's head and shoulders over the DX7, because it's black for one thing.
Because it had the onboard sequencer, velocity sensitivity, the fact that you could use it as a single writing tool. You could take it and a pair of cans and get your ideas down really quickly. It had a 7,700 note sequencer, 100 patterns. It could operate in two synthesizer modes. It used a system called A1 synthesis. And you could create programs that allowed you to have two separate effects per program, I believe. These could then be routed to either of the outputs in various ways so that you could create these huge, lush sounds. was also expandable. You could buy expander cards for it to give you an additional, I think, an additional 4 megabyte of PCM waveforms, which take it up to, I think, 257 waveforms. And they were either sampled sounds or traditional type analog waveforms. You could use the sampled waveforms as the attack transient of a sound, and then have a sampled waveform as the body of the sound. It was just hugely flexible. It could do wonderful sort of techno kind of fizzy type sounds, and it had the piano of the time. Just hugely flexible, analog sounding, rich and warm, as well as kind of digital in its essence.
You're watching sonicstate.com. Next up, it's the DX7, which features my favourite preset, the Yamaha Doppler Copter. I use it on all my tunes. Trust me, it sounds great.
Chris and I met when we were both hired as consultants for Yamaha to write some instruction manuals for their products way back for the YC products and the CS80 and then DX1. We worked on the DX7 and 9 manuals together. The thing about the DX and about FM synthesis was the incredible clarity of the harmonic structure, yes, and how you could play multiple voices and each could be distinctly heard. It wasn't muddy.
You got to remember that at that time it was all 8-bit sampling, so this would clean a sampler's clock in terms of its audio fidelity. I mean, there's no way samplers of that day could have anything, well, unless you had a $200,000 synclavier, that is, but nothing available on the market in that price range could have the audio fidelity that FM had to offer.
It was a real trick to explain to people who were accustomed to waveforms and just ordinary envelopes how operators interacted, and they'd never heard the term, actually. We hadn't either, and it was very challenging to explain to a musician how an extremely technical thing like FM synthesis could be used. And I think we did the best we could given the interface they had, and of course it was popular. They outsold any synthesizer there was for years until everybody else could catch up with some better sounding synths.
It's like trying to ride a unicycle, juggle, and carry a baby, you know, and sooner or later all 3 or all 10 are going to drop, you know, and that was the problem with FM. It was like you moved one little thing and all of a sudden you had this great sound, the whole thing just went wah, and you lost everything, you know, so because it was too tenuous, you know, it needed and it still needs today, a really solid UI, and then I think you have it.
And so, you know, where they're using it today is in fixed hardware instruments where they build in a sound and it's programmed right and it works and you don't mess with it.
I don't think anybody likes DX7s, do they? My first experience, I was in the Thompson Twins. I was using a Prophet 600 and a Prophet T8, and the other keyboard player, Carrie, got a DX7. And I hated it because it didn't have any knobs on it and it was brown.
Brian Eno is on record, isn't he, as being one of the few people that got to grips with how it worked. He got rid of all his other synths and just concentrated on that because it took all his energies just to figure out what its potential was. And I think he's probably the only person on the planet who knows that. So, you know, it just goes to show, I think, that the interface is crucial to a synthesizer because I think some German company brought out some interface for it, but it, you know, probably only Brian Eno brought it.
I was sort of surprised how they just took off sales-wise. I mean, they really became incredibly popular really fast. And then I thought about it, you know, it made sense. They did a pretty good Rhodes impersonation. And it did an okay organ sound. And the vast majority of musicians, working musicians, are not stars. They're people playing bowling alleys and bar mitzvahs and weddings and things. And this was an instrument that could replace the Fender Rhodes and the combo organ that all these kind of working musicians have to lug around.
You see, my philosophy is that synthesizers can be divided into three types. Ones that just sound like themselves, ones that are trying to sound like other things and don't really make it, and ones that are trying to sound like other things and really do sound pretty like them. And I think the DX7 is one of those. It actually had some sounds on it. I mean, the harpsichord sound on it is pretty convincing.
The brass, the clavinet, the vibes were really good. It had some great sound. I remember when I toured with Bill Nelson, luckily I managed to get my hands on one when they first came out. And Bill was so pleased, he said, "You can't get some more, can you?" So I phoned a couple of friends and said, "These DX7 things are hot stuff, you know. Why don't you buy one and then I can rent them to Bill for this US tour." So we went on tour with 4 DX7s, you know, almost the first week they came out. But still nobody could program them, we just used preset sounds. You know.
I used to collect lots and lots of sounds because it was very big on system exclusive, so you'd end up, I had thousands and thousands and thousands of sounds in a librarian, and I used to have a TX7, which is kind of a rack, tabletop rack version of it, which was just like a DX7 in a box, but with a tiny screen and no knobs and just a little, I think it just had a wheel, or was it a couple of buttons? I can't remember now. It was incredibly noisy, but it was a good way to get access to all those DX7 sounds.
I still intuitively want to go for the filter knob and the resonance knob and the attack, and you know, the DX7 doesn't think like that. It doesn't think about, there isn't really a knob that you can just grab that easily and change the filter characteristics, you know, because you've got 6 operators, so you've got to look at them all separately. They all do different things, they all intermodulate.
There was a story, but apparently the guy, I think it's Dave Bristow, who was an eminent synth programmer at the time, got flown out to Japan and said, "Oh, we've got a new synth," you know, and they built it all, and it had no sounds in it, so he had to go over there. He was flown over to kind of come up with the sounds. He had, like, you know, I don't know, 10 days or something before they were going to ship it, and he did the presets, and presumably had to learn all the presets and learn all the synthesis and stuff at the same time.
I might argue that he did that machine possibly a disservice, because it, although you know, it sounds like a lot of these sounds are very good. It had a lot of bass on it. It had a lot of lovely sort of crystalline top end to these sounds. They were just there to make kind of, you know, COD versions of other instruments. And I think the DX7 can actually make a lot of sounds that are very impressive and interesting, but nobody knows how to get at it because the interface is so useless. It's you know, you've got to be a kind of a major in computer software to understand how to program it.
It kind of got really heavily used on all those kind of generic R&B records with those sort of clangy electric pianos, and a lot of people kind of got turned off for that, I think. But I mean, let's not forget, a lot of DX and FM sounds during the 80s and 90s were the mainstay of a lot of kind of dance records. You know, solid bass, I think that was a DX100 sound, but I mean, it's still, you could do it on a DX7 as well. Lots of kind of fairly major sounds, and it was capable of some incredible noises, but as everybody's going to say, you know, it was a nightmare to program. I always use the analogy, it's like painting the hall through a letterbox.
I think it did irreparable harm to keyboards and to keyboard players and to the programmability, and it led to a generation of keyboard players that didn't know how to program a synth. In fact, even now, I think it's still guilty. It's the Thatcher of keyboards.
You know, the huge selling synthesizer and everyone's favourite synth for about 5 years, wasn't it, in the late 70s, early 80s. It's, in a way, I think it's still too advanced for, you know, the normal run-of-the-mill musician. It's still, it doesn't think in a way that is very musical. Yeah. But I think its capabilities are probably absolutely amazing.
FM works the best is in little short bites of sound. What they were trying to do was stretch out the operators to have do a lot of things over time. What you really need is to I think for FM, I'm giving away something to help people develop a new product, but what you really need to do is create an FM synthesis array so that you can have sounds develop over time in an array, so it they fold into one another. This way you can really get an FM synthesizer to do a real string. The problem is they had the right idea, but you would get just the attack or the mid part, and they tried to stretch it out with envelopes that didn't work to that degree. So everything started ending up sounding, well, either it all sounded like a Rhodes piano or a harpsichord after a while, or a shakuhachi. It was like you had three instruments that they all basically sounded the same. And that's because they weren't able to set them up in a bucket brigade. And I think if someone ever actually wanted to do that, now you could actually have FM synthesis really do something incredible.
Hi there. I've been up for 6 days on a combination of Red Bull and low-grade amphetamines. You're watching sonicstate.com. Oh, sorry, just lost interest for a while. Next up is the Prophet 5.
The Prophet 5 is actually the first musical instrument with a microprocessor in it. Now, of course, everything has them, but it was the first one, and that's what enabled us to do everything we did in it. So we had to use new technology just to make the whole instrument possible to build. My day job after I started Sequential Circuits was as a microprocessor engineer in Silicon Valley. So I had been working with them for years and was very familiar with them. So it was very easy and an obvious thing to do for me to put the Z80 microprocessor into the Prophet 5 to make it work.
The first time I ever played a Prophet synthesizer, I knew immediately I wanted one.
I actually stalled and didn't build the Prophet 5. I waited like a year before I started designing it because I just assumed the idea was so obvious that the two big companies back then, Moog and ARP, must have been working on something like that because, of course, you get a microprocessor, and I knew about these new synthesizer chips that were coming out, and you put the two together and you have a programmable polyphonic synth, and it seemed so obvious to me, and I figured I could never compete with them when they did it. So after a few months, I just started realizing, well, maybe they're not going to do it. And so, kind of like, I think probably spring of 1977, I said, well, what the heck, I'll just go for it and design it and see what happens.
It was the first synthesizer to use a microprocessor inside the synthesizer itself to control the sounds and the development of the sounds, making them very precise.
I pretty much designed everything in the instrument. I designed the hardware, I laid out the circuit boards, I designed the mechanical casing, I wrote the software, I did it all. The reliability the first year wasn't great, and we certainly had a lot of problems because there were only 2 or 3 people in the company when I started working on it, and we were still selling sequencers and programming units for other synthesizers as accessories. We barely got the synth out there before just going broke and running out of money.
It uses analog oscillators, such as we've heard and love, which perhaps makes it not as bright sounding as some of the more recent instruments. And one of the sad things, of course, about analog oscillators is that they go out of tune very easily.
When the Prophet 5 first came out, I actually had two versions. It came in both a Prophet 5 version and a Prophet 10 version in the same box. And the only difference was the voice count. Well, it was after we built a handful of each, we realized that there was just too much heat internally to have 10 voices. So we only had the 5 voice, and the few people that had 10 voices out there, we mostly converted them to 5s. So there was this, there's still this demand for a 10 voice unit. So when we finally did the 10 voice correctly, we decided, well, let's go crazy a little bit. Let's put 2 keyboards on it. Let's make it big. Let's put in the polyphonic sequencer, because poly sequencers were a new thing back then. You have to remember, back then the concept of creating patches didn't exist because there was no programmable synthesizers out there. So the idea that you have to come up with X amount of patches for your new instrument, well, you know, we were the first ones to do it. So we did it in-house. I did a few of them. John Bowen, who worked with me back then, did most of them. And we came up with the first set of 40 patches, which was, of course, a huge number back then, but a tiny number now.
I like the Prophet 5. It's an immediate polyphonic instrument. It sounds good, easy to program. I played it on the Cyndi Lauper albums that I worked on, She Bop and all those songs from She's So Unusual.
And it also had the pitch wheel and the mod wheel in the right place. They didn't try and mess about with it. And I think they were the first to spring the pitch wheel, because the Minimoog wasn't sprung, but Prophet sprung the wheel, which was good. T8 and the Prophet 600, which was a cheap version. Neither of them sounded quite like the Prophet 5, but they had that, you know, a signature sequential circuit sound.
One of the reasons Prophet 5 was so popular is because it was the best emulative instrument at the time for people to actually play more than one note at a time and to play strings and brass and everything, because you couldn't do that before. But the other reason, obviously, was just for its own fat synth sound. I knew the idea of complete programmability combined with being polyphonic was going to be pretty much a winner by itself, and nobody else had done that yet. And then as far as the sound part of it goes, you know, I thought it sounded pretty good, but until you get it into the hands of the musicians, you don't really know how far it's going to go. So when it came out, of course, it was the only thing that did what it did. It was the only thing that sounded like it did, and everybody wanted one. And you know, of course, we couldn't keep up for the first couple of years because it was crazy. So it's impossible to predict, but we were pleasantly surprised. It was all the major musicians. Everybody who was anybody wanted to get them. David Bowie, Rick Wakeman, you know, people like this were getting them from the very beginning to play both live and in the studios. It's ultimately all about the music and the music that you get out of it and what the musicians do with it. So, but it's all fun. I mean, it's nothing more fun than designing a new instrument. You know, the first time you actually get noise out of it, and then you add a new feature. And I'd have to think about that one. Maybe schizophrenic, because you know it can be taken in so many different directions. You can get as wild as you want, or it could be as tame as you want. It could be pretty, it could be mean. So maybe schizophrenic.
So if you're playing in a concert and suddenly your synthesizer goes out of tune, you can press this tune button and the whole thing goes away and you can wander off stage and have a rub down. And by the time you get back, the thing will have tuned itself and it should be perfect.
So here's the countdown. At 20, it's the ARP Selena. At 19, the Roland SH101. At 18, the VCS3. At number 17, the Nord Lead. At 16, it's the EMU Proteus. At 15, the Roland Jupiter 8. At number 14, the Yamaha CS80. In at 13, the Mellotron. At 12, the Juno 60. At number 11, it's the Oberheim OB8. Into the top 10, at 10, the ARP 2600. At 9, it's the Virus. At 8, the Roland JV1080. In at 7, it's the Korg MS-20. At 6, Roland D50. At 5, it's the love of my life, the Korg M1. At 4, it's the Yamaha DX7. Now for the top 3. At 3, the Prophet 5. You're watching sonicstate.com.
Can't get that anywhere. Can't get it. It's the only copy in existence. Common, quite common. This one's like shit in the field, it's everywhere. This new program is incredible. I can play something like this. Feed it in, comes back like this. That's exactly what I meant. I've seen the future, and it's weird. Not really.
That's it for now. Join us next time on the top 20 greatest synths of all time, ever.
sonicstate.com